Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Alan Drinks Whiskey and Talks About Books. Today I'm going to be talking about The Golden State. I actually just finished this book not too long ago. Finished it 2 days ago, I think. I did the audio version, and I really, really liked that. So, talking about The Golden State with Ben H. Winters, I am drinking Tullamore Dew, which is golden. That's not why I chose it. That's my go-to for these. And I love the Golden State because it has this really interesting concept of what if lying was illegal. Now, a disclaimer. I usually do these videos without trying to spoil the book too much. Sometimes, obviously, with those classics like 1984 or Frankenstein, yeah, I probably spoil them a little bit. But what I want to talk about today means I'm going to have to spoil the book. So, glasses come off. Cheers to that. You've been warned. So here's a synopsis. The Golden State takes place in a future California that is broken away from the United States for reasons. And we'll talk about those here in a little bit. And in the Golden State, lying is illegal. If you lie, you can be imprisoned, you can be exiled. People that are like insane and just babble nonsense, they're exiled because they do not represent reality and they can't handle reality. And so they're a threat. And so they are removed from society. It's very cut and dry, which makes it very dystopian. Also, dystopian is that everything is recorded. There's hidden cameras called captures everywhere. There are microphones everywhere, always recording things. Camera crews even go around and record things like accidents or conversations. You can even watch streams of like their television instead of having stuff that's scripted. It's just reality, and you can watch things like slipping on sidewalks, old men walking dogs, things like that, which doesn't sound fun, but they don't allow any lying at all. And that includes fiction. There's no fiction within the society. Um, and to ensure that all of this happens, in addition to all of the surveillance, there's people called speculators, and speculators can sense lies. Our main character, Laszlo, says that he can see the air being twisted by deception. He can sense lies. He almost has like an allergic reaction when someone is lying. So Laszlo is a 19-year veteran of the speculative service, so he's been at his job for a while. And the book is set up as a fairly basic cop procedural, almost to the point where it's cliche. We have our grizzled veteran in Laszlo, and he begrudgingly takes on a recruit named Asa Page, who is very young but also very talented. She's an eager go-getter, and the two clash, but they become respectful towards each other as they go on. Their first case that they take together is a man who fell off a roof, and it seems to be pretty open and shut. The guy was a roofer, he slipped, he fell. But there are anomalies. There are things that just don't quite sit right, and it turns into a web of deception that goes all the way up to the ruling heights of the Golden State. So, just a little plug. I listened to the audiobook that was read by Kif Vanderhoovel, and I hope I said his name right, but it was really good. If you like audiobooks, I highly recommend this one. The narration was top-notch. It really brought me into the story. I thought that Kif made for a great Laszlo. I felt like I knew who Laszlo was. So at this point, I'm going to start getting spoilery. So if you're intrigued by this book, and I hope you are, because the premise of it is fascinating, go read it, listen to it, bookmark this, come back to it, because I'm about to get very spoilery. So I read a review of this book that basically said that the first 2/3 of it were excellent and that the ending sucked. And I was really trying to not let that color my perception of the novel as I listened to like the last hour of it or so. But like on the surface, it was right. I was like, yeah, this isn't good. But as a reader, sometimes you get this feeling that there's something else there, like there's some symbolism or there's a message that's trying to get at. And while I know that some writers aren't great at endings, Stephen King, sometimes as a reader, you just have that feeling that the author is trying to tell you something and you have to go beyond your surface level that sucked reaction. And this is one of those times I listened to the book, I finished it, and I went, okay, I need to sit with this for a little bit and think about what is trying to be said right now. And this is kind of what I came up with. So, massive spoilers here. So, Laszlo finds out that his partner, Asa Page, as well as his mentor, are part of a conspiracy to basically erode trust and maybe eventually upend the Golden State. That there is no truth, that the best truth is to know that there is no truth, and that is what sets you free. And yeah, so again, massive spoilers. By bringing this to light, he is accused of lying and he is exiled. No one thinks for a second to use their detection powers to see whether or not he is lying or not. And it's not all that clear as to how the people around him get away with the lies, other than that, I believe that they are actors and they are so convincing in their role that Laszlo does not pick up on it. Anyway, Laszlo is exiled and he makes his way to Las Vegas where he finds his brother, which is interesting because for the first 2/3 of the novel, we were assured that Charlie Radisich was dead. He was killed in the line of duty. And even for a while, Laszlo thought that he killed him because his mentor showed him a picture of him messing with Charlie's pain med levels when he was in the hospital. And since that was on the record and there was photographic evidence, Laszlo believed it. Doesn't remember that he has no recollection of itself. It was on the record, so it must have been true until he's shown a version where his mentor is the one that kills Charlie, and another one where Charlie just succumbs to his death. So there's these conflicting stories. What's true? If they're all on the record, are they all true? But there can only be one truth. So what's going on? So anyway, he finds his brother Charlie. Charlie's in a wheelchair because of whatever happened to him. Charlie shows Laszlo a notebook that talks in a very scattered, hard to follow form that there was some sort of attack on the energy grid of the United States, quite possibly a nuclear and chemical attack as well. And in the aftermath, no one knew who to trust. Citizens turned on each other, they refused to help one another because they thought that everyone was foreign agents. So that's going on. But Charlie built this pumpkin catapult thing, and Charlie and Laszlo fire pumpkins into a Las Vegas parking lot. Charlie points to Laszlo and then to himself, making a line, establishing a connection, and then the book proper ends. Not kidding, that's how it ends. In the epilogue, Laszlo is driving to Vancouver to see if there are people who live there, because after this attack, isolated survivors, no contact, no way to communicate with other people. Again, we don't know the details. And so they're reaching out to these people that they think live in Vancouver to see if they want to trade and exchange ideals. Interestingly, they don't go to the Golden State where they know there are people, but whatever. But then Laszlo also says that some of the words in the novel are true and some are not. So that was fishy. And I just sat with this for a while and I was like, what is going on? And I was thinking about the book, thinking about a few of the key passages and things like that, things that stood out to me as a listener in this case. And I think the message in it is that context is key. Throughout the book, we are told that people can tell partial truths that go undetected, but without context, it just doesn't have that same weight. A judge in the book states that all statements contain omissions, meaning we can never have the whole truth because something is always missing. We can't know what is really real because we don't have all of the context. All statements contain omissions. Within the book, we don't know why the Golden State was created. We are simply told that the past is unknown and unknowable. But also, Laszlo refers constantly to the book Past His Prologue, which is about the founding of the Golden State. And he says it's his favorite book. When he comes across a copy of it in the dead roofer's home, he says he wants to sit down, open a random page, and read it. It's his favorite book. He loves it, so he must be familiar with the contents. But when he reads that notebook in Las Vegas about the attack on the power grid and citizens not trusting each other, thinking them to be foreign agents, he never comments on if it lines up to what he knows to be true from Past His Prologue. He doesn't go, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is confirming what I thought, or this isn't what past and is prologue said. We don't know. Maybe Laszlo doesn't know either. And then there's this line. This is actually how the epilogue begins. Laszlo writes, "This is a novel. Some of the words in it are true, and a lot of them are not. And a lot of them are of that indeterminate third category for which there is no good name. But you can say that it is an amalgam of true and false events, true and false impressions, a series of imagined and actual experiences that have been strung together in a particular order to provide access to a kind of truth that might otherwise be unavailable, and more precious for it. Blindly, blindly, we are feeling our way towards something." Okay? And it's a really odd thing. And one thing about, like, when you listen to it, like, you really kind of get one shot at it. You get one shot where it goes, this is what we're this is what's said, and then you move on. And yeah, you can go back and re-listen to it, but it's a little bit harder, especially if you're like me and you typically listen to books in the car. You kind of get one shot at it. If I was reading this on the page, it might come across a little bit different. And even now, I'm reading it on my computer screen in front of me, and things are jumping out at me. And especially this, it's an amalgam of true and false events, true and false impressions, a series of imagined and actual experiences that have been strung together in a particular order to provide access to a kind of truth that might otherwise be unavailable. Blindly, blindly, we are feeling our way towards something. And what is that something? Well, this is kind of what science fiction does. And yes, this is a work of fiction, but still, it's hard not to read that line there and think about our modern society where we have very partisan news sources and we get into our echo chambers and things like that. And Winters writes earlier on in the book, when Laszlo was still very much Team Golden State, imagine if everyone did it. Imagine if each person was allowed the luxury of claiming their own truth, building a reality of their own in which they can live. Imagine the danger that would pose, how quickly those lies would metasize, and the extraordinary threat that would pose to the world. You don't need to think too hard about what Winters is commenting on. I mean, forget like the election or COVID or whatever. I mean, there's a growing movement of people that think that the world is flat. And yeah, I'm going to have to drink after saying that. Like, we've known that the world is round for centuries. But it can become dangerous when people have their own realities. And when people are convinced that people that disagree with them politically are enemies of the people and they must be dealt with accordingly. It's terrifying, some of the language that's out there, especially if you're like me and you tend to shade blue and you live in a very red area of the country. I think this can kind of almost be summed up really well with the current debate around critical race theory, in which people who don't know what it is attack it for saying things that it doesn't say, but they are convinced that they are right, and they are convinced that this evil is being perpetrated upon the children. Never mind that this came out of nowhere and that critical race theory is not taught in like high school. It's a college level thing, but still, some of these bans on teaching CRT really muddy the waters about what teachers can teach. And can they teach about slavery and talk about the true horrors of slavery? Can they talk about the Tulsa Race Massacre? Can they talk about Malcolm X? Or are we only confining the civil rights movement to the, I have a dream that one day people will be judged by the content of their hearts and not the colors of their skin, and that's the end of the civil rights movement discussion. Can we talk to our students about Black Lives Matter or anything else sensitive in an objective way? And by the way, you can talk about these things without saying that Black Lives Matter is right. You can say, this is what Black Lives Matter claims. And then you can look at stats and you can look at things to back that up. And then you can also say, this is what other people on the other side say. And you can let your students come to their own conclusions about that. Just that they have access to information doesn't mean anything. But that context is key. Now, over the past year plus, really ever since the George Floyd incident in Minnesota, I've tried to do more diverse reading and educate myself on these topics. Just an off the top of my head book recommendation is Stamped from the Beginning. I learned so much from reading that book. And I was really appreciative of that book because I often feel and still feel that when there's discussions about race, I'm always missing information and certain perspectives. I admit, I learned about the Tulsa Massacre from Watchmen. I'm one of those people. And that's not really anybody's fault. Like, yeah, maybe it should have come up in a US history class at some point, but it didn't. And I can't hold that against my old teachers because they didn't bring it up, because I did learn a lot. But still, I'm missing parts of the puzzle. I'm missing perspectives. And if I don't get those perspectives, and if we don't allow others to gain those perspectives, then the truth that we stand on is pretty shaky. It's not the whole truth. Every statement contains omissions. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That one held a lot of omissions, namely women, people of color, natives, uh, white men who did not own property. Lots of omissions in that statement, but that's a statement that we hold true to our self-national ethos. But then when you start examining it, you have some questions. And that doesn't mean that the ideal is wrong. It doesn't mean that the ideal is bad. I think that ideal is great. But it does mean that we've got work to do. And if you're afraid of the work, well, I'm sorry. Truth makes us uncomfortable. Talking about race, sexism, talking about discrimination faced by LGBTQ people, it makes us uncomfortable. And wrapping ourselves up in lies can make us feel safer. And wrapping ourselves up in mottos and slogans can make us feel better about ourselves. But when that truth comes, our whole world collapses. And then what do we hold on to? We hold on to that truth as we know it. And then the people that have different perspectives, they become the enemy. They become something way different. This is what happens to Laszlo. This is what happens in the United States, according to that tattered notebook in Las Vegas. People turn on each other because they don't know who to trust. Can you trust your neighbor that has been talking about QAnon stuff? Can you trust your neighbor who has a Black Lives Matter flag? Can you trust your neighbor who disagrees with you? Can you see their humanity even though you don't agree? There's got to be a common truth somewhere. By the way, I am in no way equating QAnon with Black Lives Matter. I just use those as examples that the other side finds controversial. But trust me, I do not in any way, shape, or form think that they are equivalent. So please, not that anybody actually watches these and will give me comments, but on the off chance that you do, please know that. So the ending of this book doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface, but I think it's better than a lot of people give it credit for. And like all grown-up dystopian novels, what do you expect our hero with no allies to do? Laszlo Radisich is Winston Smith, if Winston got away. But Big Brother is still watching. The record is still being added to. So what can you do except launch pumpkins into a parking lot and make a memory, make reality, make a connection with another human being? That's what we can do, and maybe that's the truth that we're supposed to be getting at. So, by the way, if you watch this without reading it and you're spoiled and you think, I'm good, do yourself a favor. Read this book, listen to this book. The audio book is so good. I cannot recommend it enough. Probably one of my favorite books that I've read this year, even with the iffy ending that I think I'm talking myself into liking more and more as time goes on. So here's to the truth. Thanks again for watching. Like, subscribe, all those things that YouTubers tell you to do. Hey, I've done a video not 3 months after the previous one, so things are looking up here. So we'll see you the next time on Alan Drinks Whiskey and Talks About Books. Cheers.